With the recent announcements by the government about nuclear submarines, which areas will you be watching in future where housing will be required? Obviously around Rockingham, Kawana will still be required due to bases around that area. But what sort of things will be you looking at to help determine which suburbs will be looked at? For example, submarine building in Adelaide. Obviously this is some time off before actual investments, and how you see this having an effect in the short term in Rockingham, Kawana. It's a really good question. For me, the short term, probably not much. I know my cousin-in-law is based in the Navy in Rockingham area. So there's obviously the Department of Defence are present there already. Look, the conversations around the sub building in Adelaide has been something that we were talking about that in 2018, right? So a lot of these purchases here were in Adelaide. You know, the submarines, this is 5 years ago now, and you know, we haven't got any closer to it. So for me, I get a little bit concerned about these longer term projects. You know, we all know what the governments can be like with going in and out of a market. Sure, the long term is great, but I'd much prefer to be making my money in the first 5 years. You know, strategically positioning ourselves, potentially the way to look at it is where if it was to go ahead, we would benefit, but if it wasn't to go ahead, we wouldn't suffer, I guess. You know, so I know in the Adelaide area, Port Adelaide is you know, where this would all be happening, where the industry would be attached to. But then there's a lot of supporting industries, a lot of manufacturing. So you have an industrial band there in the sort of northwest part of Adelaide, anywhere from Port Adelaide all the way into Salisbury. You know, so you've got your Charles Sturts, your West Torrens, a lot of those areas. That was our thesis. So for Adelaide, the benefit from the submarine industry would be the direct port area and then all of the supporting industries in that middle class northern pocket. So not talking the Elizabeths of the world, we are talking into parts of Salisbury, but particularly between Salisbury and Port Adelaide. Okay, and that was our logic, and I think that still stands. For Rockingham, remember, it's not really it's the ongoing employment that is important, and then who would be then staying there on site. So we don't want somewhere to, you know, it's a longer term project, but we don't want the construction to be for 3 months and everyone moves off. Obviously, the key drivers of utility in Rockingham and Kawana are the ocean and the water, the proximity to the shops and schools in Rockingham, but then also the train and the accessibility up into Perth. So you can sometimes get away with being on that train line inland. And just remember, what would a lot more employment do to Rockingham? It would make Rockingham itself more important than potentially the train line. You know, so proximity into Rockingham and the beach probably starts trumping the train line and those train stations closer up into the Perth CBD. And, you know, as you're going closer to the Perth CBD, that's where there's a lot of the supply risk as well. So at a common sense, you know, high level logic perspective, I'll probably with this in mind, going through the logic that if it goes ahead, you benefit. If it doesn't go ahead, you don't suffer. Focusing our attention more towards the Rockingham CBD and then as closer to the beach as you can get. And, you know, there have been some really strong use cases or purchase cases recently for 3 or 4 suburbs inland. If this is what you're really focused on, maybe sticking to 1 to 2 suburbs inland and not the 3 to 4, which we're still comfortable with. But, you know, if you're fixated on the submarine and the naval industry, potentially keeping closer into Rockingham. Just because it is having a higher intrinsic level of employment and not reliant on the Perth as the larger capital that's close by. So hopefully that answers your question as well.